We've had a lot of candidates that were perfect on paper and really excited to speak to. And then they sit back and you ask them, can you tell me a little bit about yourself? He goes, it's all on my CV.
Oh,
So, that's not an answer that I can do anything with. Any interview that you do, you will be asked, you're guaranteed one question. And it's tell me a bit about yourself or tell me about your experience. There's a massive discrepancy here between understanding what you can do with that question. So candidates have an opportunity answering that question in the right way, have an opportunity to showcase their achievements, but also actually guide the conversation with the recruiter. There's a little bit of a kind of criteria here for this, right? You would say, first of all, make sure what you're talking about is
hiring processes at the moment are not ideal. What do you think the bottlenecks are at the moment with hiring processes? What are the challenges?
there's quite a lot happening out there at the moment from kind of bottlenecks and things like that. So if you take the start of the process, for example, I'd say the amount of people available on the market right now is creating a huge bottleneck for recruiters when it comes to seeping through CVs and trying to get to the talent. And I think that's why we're all at the moment trying to find new ways to get through CVs through with AI and all of these things. So that's a huge bottleneck right now, and it's definitely one of the reasons that I think a lot of people and talent are not getting responses from recruiters as well. Um, moving through the process, a lack of alignment from hiring managers to interviewers to recruitment is another huge issue that I see regularly within my company, but also across the market, of course, as well. That the hiring manager says that he wants this, but the job description says something completely different, and then the interviewers are not informed about what they're looking for, so then they're interviewing somebody at a senior level when they're actually meant to be for a mid-level role, and then you only realize that afterwards at the debrief, and then you realize, okay, that's an issue because there's people that are just fully misaligned on that front. So I'd say misalignment is another big one. Then when it comes to transparency, so a lack of transparency when it comes to salaries and even the length of the process, for example, as well. The last you think you've been told that it's the last. If you're a candidate, you've been told it's the last stage of the process, and then eventually, the hiring manager is not too sure about that last skill, and it decides to have another interview, and then that adds another week, 2 weeks onto the process, frustrates the candidate, frustrates recruitment, but just ultimately creates a difficult candidate experience or a poor candidate experience later on in the process as well. So I would say those are kind of the three or four to name on top of mind at the moment.
Yeah, and that's 3 and 4 too many, right? And so many companies are dealing with the same issues. Like we're all struggling, whether it's a startup or it's like a giant company with thousands of people.
Yeah.
They're all dealing with the same thing. Do you think like the hiring process or like even the application process is like a bit archaic?
At the moment, it is a little outdated in that way. I think that's why we're in recruitment right now. We're all trying to look to use AI to help screen candidates a lot quicker, get to the top quality candidates, and then be able to kind of reach out to them in a faster time frame. But ultimately, there's a human touch to all of this that I think we've all realized AI is not able to help us with.
Yeah.
And that's why the difficulty here is, we want to be able to go through all of these CVs at the start of the process, but ultimately we just don't have the time to do it. And so we're not necessarily looking for AI to help us do that role for us, but we're asking it to help us reduce the time when it comes to actually doing this more than anything else.
Yeah, I've seen some polls on LinkedIn on this topic. just, for example, saying, would you like AI to screen your
Yeah,
CV? Would you like AI to interview you, etc.? And I think even candidates or applicants don't really know what they want because those results are mixed. They're saying we want a response, we don't care who gives it,
yeah,
but we also want the human touch. But like you said, the market is really crazy at the moment. There's so many layoffs, there's so many people looking for work, and even employed people are looking to get out of a toxic company
yeah,
or just get a promotion, right? So there's a lot of competition, and like you said, recruiters are overworked essentially at the moment, and we're trying to do everything at the same time. So AI
yeah,
is a good solution for now, isn't
yeah.
it?
And this is only the start of the process, right? Think about everything else that we need to do. Once we start getting a pipeline built up, once we start putting candidates through, we still have a roll up. We still have candidates consistently coming through.
Mm.
So, on top of bringing candidates through the entire process, we still need to stay on top of, um, direct applicants coming through. Also, potentially source candidates that you reached out to a week ago that are now getting back to you. You know, these things, all of this starts to add up, and ultimately, something's got to give. And I think right now we're seeing what is giving is, unfortunately, recruitment just doesn't have the time to respond sometimes to over 200 applicants that are getting that are actually applying. And so we need to find a solution there. We need to find a way to maintain a strong candidate experience, whether you're in the very start of the process or halfway through or even at the end of the process as well.
So, to fix the problem or try to, what do you think personally are like the key components for a good recruitment strategy?
So if we're looking at an overall recruitment strategy, I think the core components that we want to look at, first and foremost, is employer branding and, let's say, employer value proposition. So um, throughout my time, like I've worked with a giant organization that's had the biggest brand possible in Facebook. And I've also worked for a company that literally had zero employer brand initially when I started at Dot, but also at Abstraction. And I think um, no matter the size of the company, so long as you're visible, right? So on social media, you're active, you're engaging, and you're creating a positive image for your company. That's really important. Um, but also you're seen at events. Okay, you're seen out there engaging with your audience, engaging with the right demographic, who you want to actually engage with, who you want to attract. That's really, really important from a candidate point of view. And then from an employer value proposition, what is it that you can offer? Okay, so you need to be able to offer something that others are not offering at the moment. And I think that's a really important component to having a recruitment strategy that is attractive to candidates. So I'd say that's probably number one. And number two is regarding sourcing. So you need to have a strong sourcing strategy if you're going to go out and find candidates that fit your organization. So that means you need to understand the market. You need to also understand, the types of candidates that you're actually trying to go after. You need to have alignment with your team internally, of course. And then you need to be smart about how you're going to go out and source, right? You need to have multiple different channels, shall we say, of sources. So direct applicants, referrals, networking events, actual direct sourcing itself as well. So, having people from multiple different mediums or sources provides more of a diverse pool of candidates for you as well. And then, yeah, I'd say the third thing would be looking at kind of your own company culture and values and making sure that you understand, what the company is. Okay. So when I say that, I mean, being very clear about the mission of the organization and the values that you guys want within the company as well, so that you can attract people that have that same kind of values, those similar values. And honestly, the last thing I would say is consistent improvements and feedback. So regardless of how the company is growing at the moment, things are going to change.
Mm.
No matter what environment you're in, things are going to shift and change. If you go from 10 employees to 50 employees, the strategy is potentially going to change. And if you go from, 50 to 200, of course, the whole environment is going to shift and change. And, I think having a recruitment strategy that you're able to adapt to that environment and also learn from, the lessons that have taken place up to this point, but also be able to shift your whole strategy, shall we say, based off of what's happening on a company level, is really, really important. So being agile and having the ability to receive feedback, take it on board, shift and change based off of that and based off of the environment that you're in. And I think one of the core things and one of the core ways to do that is to actually be sitting at the top table with executives and the C level to have more insights into what's happening and more insights into what is expected of the company in the next 6 months, 12 months. Where do they
Mm.
want to take things? And if you're left in the dark on that front, it's very difficult for recruitment to set up a strategy for success at the end of the day. So I'd say that's definitely at the core of having a successful recruitment strategy and a solid strategy overall as well.
Yeah, so fixing the foundation before you start implementing AI and adding stuff onto your process
Yeah.
sounds like a solid plan. And let's go then towards the initial kind of hiring process then. So like kickoffs for the job and
Yeah.
job descriptions as well. I'm curious on your thoughts.
Yeah. So if we're looking at the actual interview process itself, I think that first of all, it sounds very obvious, but having a very clear and structured process is so important, and it is a knock-on effect in so many other areas of the process as well. So, having that smooth and structured process allows the candidate to not have to think about, not have to worry too much about what's happening. They're very clear about the whole process. They just need to focus on being prepared for the interviews. But let's say if you're a candidate and you get somebody, they cancel on you with a day to go, and
Some people do like minutes
yeah,
before.
and that really, first of all, creates a terrible experience for the candidate, but also the candidate will start questioning whether they potentially want to work for this company. From an image perspective, it looks very poor as well. So first of all, going back to your question, is having a very structured process. So when I talk about that, I mean having an alignment document, so that's what I would call it, but it's a kickoff document where you've got all of your questions that you'd ask your hiring team, your hiring managers. You would also, in my one, I would also include the job description and also the interviewers. So the interview process and all the interviewers involved. And so at the start of the process, I would send that to the whole interview team so that everybody knows, what we're looking for. They see the job description, they can comment if they want on it, but they also understand what focus areas they're responsible for. So first is that alignment document. Second is actually having alignment. It's easy to have an alignment document. That can get lost sometimes,
Mm.
and interviewers can definitely, think they know what they're interviewing for. But it's important to try and get everybody in a room and actually say, right, okay, this is what we're actually looking for. Is there any questions? Because this is the most important part of the process. If you get this wrong, you're going to waste about a month, 2 months in sourcing a candidate that's not relevant, that's
Mm.
not at the level that you want them to be at, or doesn't have the skill set that you're looking for. Interviewers are then become unhappy with the process. They've spent a lot of time interviewing.
Mm.
So again, a very negative knock-on effect if you don't get this part of the process right. So um, if you get that right, everything else kind of falls into place, right? You are able to work really closely with the hiring manager. You actually are able to share profiles with them. I would always recommend from a recruitment point of view or from a recruiter's perspective, share profiles at the start of the process with your manager. And then, share different profiles with
Mm.
them. Don't share them the same one. Um, and allow them to pick which one is the most suitable for you, and then align that with the alignment document that you actually created with them. Is it in line with what you've actually set out in that document? If not, there's a red flag immediately that
Yeah.
they're potentially looking for something that is not on paper. So once you do that, then make sure you've got your interviewers all aligned and understand the process. And at that point, you need to have focus areas. So have focus areas for each interview. It reduces repetition across the interview process. It also reduces bias and maintains consistency with the questions that you're going to be asking as well. So that's really, really important to make sure that they're very clear about what their focus area is, and that they know what questions they're going to be asked. And the very bottom line of interviewing and a solid interview process is actually trust.
Mm.
If the hiring manager does not trust even one of those interviewers, they're going to question if they've been asked the right questions, and they're going to want to probably interview that person for the same thing that was just interviewed by a
Mm.
different interviewer. So first of all, the hiring manager needs to trust the interviewers, but the interviewers need to trust each other. They can't lean into other focus areas because they're concerned about, let's say, a candidate's technical ability if they're focusing on collaboration. And I think making that clear again at the very start of the process is so, so important, because you set the expectations with everybody.
Yeah.
So at that point, then, how many things there have I spoken about that
Mm.
need to fall into place for it to be a very smooth process that the candidate doesn't even notice what's happening?
Yeah.
It's there's a lot to consider, and a lot to take into account from a recruitment point of view and from a recruiter's responsibility, I would say.
Yeah, yeah, this is good insights as well to see what goes on behind the scenes for anyone who's thinking, why is the process so long and why is there, yeah, a case and like why are there so many steps and different people involved? I also always tell the person who's going through the interviews, like interview us back.
Yeah,
I always say this in my screening call. I say interview the hiring manager back, ask about the challenges, why they're looking, etc. Like you need to vet us out as well. You need to make a decision. It's not like we're
yeah,
in the oh, sorry. It's not like we're in the throne, we've got all the power.
yeah.
You're also making a big life decision. You're finding a new job.
Like, hands down, some of the best candidates I've ever interviewed, we spent more time answering their questions than we did actually answering mine, because for someone that comes to the table, excuse me, for somebody that comes to the table fully prepared with questions, it doesn't just show me like, oh, they're good questions. It shows me they've already pictured themselves in this position. They've already thought about some of the challenges they're potentially going to be facing. They've already thought about the team that they're going to be working with. They're already looking at all of these things. They've reviewed our our website. They've looked
Mm.
at all of these other aspects that most other candidates have not looked at.
Yeah.
So if there's any advice for candidates out there, it's prepare as many questions as possible. And if they are not answered earlier in the interview, ask the questions.
Yeah.
Make sure you get a chance to ask the questions. Any good recruiter will give you time to ask those questions.
Yeah. For me personally, I always book like an hour and then I'll book the person in for 30 minutes because if we run over 45 minutes or even do the full hour, I've got a gap and then I've also got a gap to write my notes, talk to the manager, etc. as well. So,
Yeah, it's those are the interviews I leave energized and really feeling like this person really wants the job, and I'm really excited to put them through because they've left such a good impression on me. So at that point, it's more about any questions I can't answer, bring them to the next interview, bring
mm,
them to the hiring manager, ask them there. And again, that's feedback I've received from managers, from other interviewers, is like, they ask some amazing questions,
Mm,
right? So they are the key to showcasing yourself, I think, especially at more of a senior level, to be completely honest with you.
yeah.
At a more of a senior level, it's much more about, like, if I'm interviewing a senior, let's say even a senior recruiter, I'm not actually as concerned about doing the basics or the foundations of recruitment anymore. It's much more about high level, and it's what I want to see is, like, how curious are they? Like, what do they want to know about us? That
Yeah.
shows me what type of person, or how much they actually want that position.
How do you feel about when people bring presentations to interviews, or like imagine themselves like fixing an issue that you have?
It depends if they bring them voluntarily or
I like it. I
I've
like
had I've
it.
had one situation in the past where they did that, and first of all, I thought it was really, really well done, and again, it shows how much they want the role, right?
Mm,
It does. Um, I think you need to be very careful that they're not going down a rabbit hole that isn't relevant. Okay, so if they're going to do something like that, if they're going to spend, because you will spend a huge amount of time putting presentation together, so that in itself shows how much you do want it. But if it's on something that's not really that relevant, or um, is not as important as other aspects of the role, you might be wasting your time. So
mm.
um, yeah, I would be a little bit hesitant telling people to do that if if they haven't been asked to do it. I'd be much more focused on what's being asked within the actual interview
Yeah.
stage, and also, being fully prepared for those things. Because if you spend a huge amount of time on a presentation, but actually don't prepare for the questions you're asked, this is great over here, but ultimately, like, we're asking every other candidate these questions
Mm.
as well. So it's important to get these right first. And that's an additional bonus if you've done this well, right, shall we say.
Yeah, yeah, because we're trying to prevent bias in the
Absolutely. And you
process.
have to, right? Someone brings that to the table, and that's an additional side thing that they can add, which is great, but you can't overlook what the initial content and core of the interviews that we're asking everyone.
Yeah. And what about the job descriptions? You touched on it earlier. What about the job descriptions themselves then? Because there's like this division with like, we want to be as honest as possible, but we don't want to say, for example, oh, Jimmy left, so this is why the job's open. I mean, it's funny, but as a person applying for a job, you're kind of thinking, overthinking everything, right? Like red flags, like, why did Jimmy leave? This is oddly specific. So how do you feel about job descriptions?
Yeah, I think if we're talking specifically about, like, that area of job descriptions, um, I'm I would say I'm not too concerned about that, because I wouldn't be putting it in plain view, to be honest, why the role is available. I do think it's important to be transparent with candidates, but a recruiter can do that in the first interview. The
Mm,
expectation is not within a job description why the role is available. Of course, you'll put in the job description. We're looking for, a senior product manager for this specific area in this position, and it's an opportunity to sell the role and showcase the position. That's why we've got job descriptions. But you don't need to go into huge detail about why it's available until you get on the phone. If a candidate asks you why it's available, it's no problem to say someone's ended up leaving the role. We're looking for someone to fill in the gap. That's okay. That's natural. Everybody,
yeah.
the market is competitive out there, so I wouldn't be too
Yeah.
worried about it.
Yeah. And how do you feel about, because we're talking through still like the interview process and how
Yeah,
it should be. Um, how do you feel about recruiters being that first interview?
I think it's really important that the recruiter is the first interview for a few reasons. First of all, we are the experts in recruitment at the end of the day. We know We know what questions to be asking candidates. It's important. It's our job and our responsibility to, you know, get the finer details, get salary expectations, get their start date, etc. That hiring managers should not even have to think about and shouldn't be worried about. All we want hiring managers to be focused on is this person, do they have the ability to do the role? And that it's incredibly difficult to get hiring managers to purely focus on that, because they are thinking about, when can this person start? Is it as soon as possible?
They still ask,
They
even when you
still
say to
ask.
them, don't ask. I've
Yeah.
already asked. I think because it's in forefront of their mind, they
Yeah.
just ask anyway.
And some of them even ask salary expectations.
Yeah.
And, for them, it's their team, right? So they feel responsible for it, which I understand. I do get that. But you need to, again, at the start of the process, set the expectations with them. If you've worked with a hiring manager, you have a good relationship with them at the start, I think you can pull them up on it if they have done it within the interview itself. But make it clear that, these are questions that you don't need to worry about. Okay. They'll tell us our salary. We're going to go to our salary matrix and align and make sure that they're within the band, or if they're not, we'll let you know. But this is not something that you need to focus on. So
Mm.
I think that's why recruitment and recruiters need to be the first step in the process overall.
Yeah, I've seen people on Reddit and LinkedIn say, why are recruiters the first? Like, they're not the hiring manager. What do they know? We get a lot of shit for it,
We
but
do.
I think it's necessary, like you said, for the knockout criteria. And
Yeah. And I'll be honest, like, working in recruitment, you get a good understanding of how to kind of navigate that conversation and an interview. So you can get through that quite quickly. Okay, you're not going to go into too much depth into each of these areas, shall we say, that you're responsible for. But like, I do think you're going to be able to tell whether the person has the initial skills that we're looking for and has the motivation to join the company. Like, we speak to how many candidates a week or a month. We know what a
mm,
motivated candidate looks like.
mm,
We just do. And a hiring manager that's got 100 other things on his plate speaks to a candidate, they might speak to quite a few if you're going through hyper growth, but still, it's still it's still a lot to ask them to make a judgment call on whether this is do they have the right motivation to join the organization, as well as skills, as well as this, as well as it's just a lot. So it's important to split it up in those areas, shall we say.
yeah. And there has been instances, I'm sure you've had this too, where someone's perfect on paper, but when they show up to the interview, they are just, you can just feel it when they're not interested, they're not motivated, they just need a job, right? And if I'm watching or listening to this podcast and I'm applying for jobs and I'm a
Mm.
bit exhausted or burnt out and I'm not energetic and I can't really put my best foot forward for an interview, what's the importance as a recruiter's perspective for motivation, like during an interview?
One of the main things that I've actually mentioned before is questions. Okay. I think that's hugely important, but also being able to showcase your achievements. Okay. So, um, I've gone on about this on LinkedIn quite a bit, but in every single interview that a candidate that you're going to do, any interview that you do, the start of the process, you will be asked, you're guaranteed one question. And it's, tell me a bit about yourself, or can you tell me about your experience, or something like that. I think there's a massive discrepancy here between understanding what you can do with that question. So uh, candidates have an opportunity, answering that question in the right way, have an opportunity to showcase their achievements, but also actually guide the conversation with the recruiter. And if you drop nuggets that are hugely, you know, impressive and I suppose important, not important is the wrong word. Um, but I would say insights into what you've done the recruiter will pick up on this. And that's a great conversation. If you say, oh, I led this project that ended up, leading to the company growing its revenue by 200%. Be like, oh, tell me a lot more about that project, please.
Yeah.
I think candidates go into that question without preparing for it. And they say, okay, well, I worked here, then
In
I did
2006, I went
this.
to school.
Yeah,
They
exactly.
go all the way back.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But if there's a little bit of a kind of criteria here for this, right? You would say, first of all, make sure what you're talking about is relevant to the role. Okay. You can talk about, obviously, brush over your education, but make sure that you get into the crux of what's relevant to the position that you're interviewing for. That's what I want to hear as a recruiter.
Mm.
After that, highlight your achievements that you've had in the past, whether it be you've just come out of college and you've led a team project that, whether it be passed or was number one in the class. Okay. It doesn't matter, but make sure you highlight those achievements. And then from there, I think drop nuggets of those things and allow me to ask a question of, tell me a bit more about that, or can you elaborate a little bit more on that one? That sounds great. You want that, and that gives you an opportunity to actually guide the conversation, because you'll have prepared examples that you've just dropped nuggets of, and then I'll ask you that question. You'll have already prepared an answer for this.
Yeah.
And listen, there's definitely very structured recruitment processes out there that may not follow that route. But, your initial conversation with a recruiter is really a conversation. It's not as much of an interview as the hiring manager stage or the team interview stage. So, this is a great way to showcase yourself in a way that allows me to kind of ask you, more probing questions to get you to elaborate on things you've already prepared.
Yeah. And I don't know if it's this common practice, but after that, I will go to the hiring manager, right? So everything you say builds a picture for me to bring to the hiring manager.
Absolutely.
So remember that.
Absolutely. And enthusiasm's huge as well. Okay. Even if you're remote, if you're showcasing, body language that's super excited when you talk about the position or what you've just done, or your voice will elevate, you'll sit forward. There's a lot of these things that you can even see within a video that tells me that you're excited about the position.
Yeah.
Like you were just talking about candidates that look perfect on paper. Like I've had a lot of candidates that were perfect on paper and really excited to speak to. And then they sit back and you ask them, like I had a candidate that I asked, can you tell me a little bit about yourself? He goes, it's all on my CV.
Oh.
So, that's not an answer that I can do anything with. And also creates a poor view of the candidate from my perspective as well. So, make sure you do elaborate. Make sure you do tell more details, because your CV can't tell everything that you've done. It just can't. So be willing and be able to actually explain all those things in detail.
Yeah. The pushback we get from applicants is, oh, I'm burnt out from like doing so many interviews and being rejected all the time. But think about us. We're doing interviews sometimes back to back, 6, 7, 8 a day.
Yeah.
And we always show up like, hello, like very nice to meet you. Like we still bring that energy. So you just have to remember we're a different person to your last interviewer.
Yeah.
And you want to stand out to 7, 8, 9 different people being interviewed. So it's so important, not just like being good on paper, but we're convinced, right? And an interview is you trying to not make us move you to the next process, right? Like you've sold us already on your application. Prove it. Convince us even more that you are deserving of this job, right?
Yeah. And I think for candidates that are going through the process a lot, yes, it's very difficult, of course. Especially if you're like getting to like close to the final stage and you're just not getting across the line. I think what will get you there is definitely just resilience and persistence as well. Um, but also, you know, ask for feedback from all of your previous interviews. Um, Again, easy for me to kind of say it in my position, but you know, again, candidates that come back to me after being rejected uh, and ask me for feedback, you know, that does show me that they want to learn and grow a little bit more. And down the road, you may reach back out to them. Okay. So it leaves a good impression with that company. And again, if you've done a good interview, um, they're they might have a friend of theirs might own a company that has a similar role.
Yeah.
Okay, like do your best to be professional, I think, in that way.
Yeah. Yeah. And with interviews then, what do you think is like the sweet spot with amount of interviews?
Oh yeah. So I read a book called Work Rules by Laszlo Bock, and it's about him talking about interviewing. He worked at Google. He was one of the I think he was C-level up in Google, and you know, this was relatively early in my career when I read this. But it stuck with me. He's a very data and analytics driven person, and he was talking about this exact thing where, um, you know, we've got companies that have 7, 8, 9 stages within the process, and he said the actual optimal sweet spot is actually 4, and after that, you see uh, a diminishing margin of returns, right? So essentially, that means that um, anything after 4 interviews, you're either going to hear again, or the results are not going to be worth the amount of time and effort that you put into it.
Mm.
And I think that's something that I've tried to implement in all of my previous companies now at this point, is because you also see it. Okay, like anything past 4, you do notice that the similar questions are being asked, or there's a reason. There's something not right there if you're going on to 5, 6,
Yeah.
7 interviews. Again, trust becomes probably the biggest issue there, because yeah, hiring managers potentially don't trust some of the interviews that are there, and they want to see it for themselves, which means they need to do the interview themselves, or everybody in the team needs to interview this person that's joining the
Mm.
team, and there's 5 people in the team, which means everybody needs to interview. And it's like, can you please get, you know, 2 people do 1 interview with the candidate, and everybody in the team needs to trust that the team is bringing in, they're going to interview the person in the right way. You know, that's core to yeah, to having, I suppose, the right amount of interviews, shall we say there.
Yeah, 3 or 4 I think is good because anything less is suspicious. Even from the candidate's
Yes.
perspective, like it's too rushed.
And they don't get a chance to ask all the questions they potentially have. And
Yeah.
they also, from a candidate's perspective, they need to get buy-in from the company. And you know, I think the more people you speak to, it's natural you're going to get more buy-in if they're aligned with your own values and who you are. It gets you more excited as a candidate. It gets you, you know, you get more detail about the job itself and the team that you're going to be working with. So all of those things really add a huge amount of value to the end of the process when you're about to close somebody and
Yeah.
you get to an offer stage. And you know, I think as a recruiter, you know if you have the candidate bought in or
Mm.
not.
Yeah.
And ultimately, it does sometimes come down to the fact that you've rushed the process and you just need to get somebody in because you have a manager breathing down your neck saying, we need this person starting, you know, next month. And sometimes that's what scares them away
Mm.
at the end of the day.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm just thinking back to like the rushed interviews and the really long interview processes. And with that, so it sounds like you're implementing a lot of things and you've implemented stuff at your companies. Could you tell us a bit more about the projects that you've implemented to enhance like recruitment processes?
Yeah, no problem. So I'll go kind of all the way back to potentially my time at Facebook, which then I could bring a few things forward with me. So when I was at Facebook, again, similar to the book that I read, but it was a very structured interview process that was 4 stages. And the core to that was having a diverse panel of interviews, having focus areas, having a question bank. And I didn't know any of this when I first went into Facebook. It was my first internal recruitment job, very different. There's a lot of challenges with moving from agency to in-house anyway.
Mm.
But on top of that, I was trying to like get to grips with candidate experience and setting up a structured interview process. So that's something that I've brought with me to, Dot and also abstraction now, which is creating clear focus areas for interviewers, because ultimately interviewers don't want to they don't have to think about what they're going to ask a candidate when they go into an interview. They want to be very clear about what they're going to be asking. And so having questions laid out for them, making sure that they know what type of answers to be looking for, junior, mid-level, senior answer, what do they all look like? That's like headspace that they don't need to worry about anymore. So I've tried to bring that as one of the core projects to the smaller companies, and it's been really successful, thankfully, over the two companies that I've been in, much smaller. And then outside of that, additional things such as adding a recruitment candidate guide. So providing candidates with more information to prep for interviews, understanding more about the organization from when it started, how it's grown to this point, who our CEO is, who our COO is, what's our mission, what are our values. Sure, you can probably find a lot of it if you seep through our website and you really go into detail. But again, think about the candidate experience and how much easier it is if they just have it all in a presentation or a PDF.
Good for the
And
recruiter as well if they're new to the
really
business.
great, really great. And then within that, you can separate it and you can talk about different departments, what each one is responsible for. You can go into the actual interview process. So it's very clear. They know exactly what to expect. So that's been hugely impactful, I think, as well. I've gotten a lot of good feedback from candidates. Speaking of feedback, we also implemented candidate surveys at my last two companies as well, which has helped with us being able to look back at our own processes,
How does that look
identify.
like?
A lot of companies, I think, are quite hesitant to do this, and I think I understand, the hesitation, but I've only really seen a positive response, and not from candidates per se. We've gotten very negative responses, which is a really good thing for us to be able to reflect on and actually look at our own internal processes, right? I think ultimately feedback is one of the most important things you can get within recruitment at any stage of the process, and getting it from an external party that's gone through the process. We think it's perfect, of course. We've set up the process, so it's obviously going to be perfect. It never is. There's always issues, there's always bottlenecks, and it's amazing to get feedback, live feedback from candidates that are telling us, the recruiter went missing for 7 days. I didn't hear anything back, or the interviewer was 10 or 15 minutes late for this, which meant I wasn't able to ask questions at the end of the interview. And these would be things that we don't see because we're not in the interview. Okay, so it's great to be able to get that type of feedback from them. And I think if you're going to set up your survey, it's important to identify different areas. So you talk about the recruiter. Was the recruiter responsive to your requests, or were they in regular communication with you? Did they provide you with the right prep to move forward within the interview? Then have a section based on interviewers, of course, and ask, was the interviewer prepared for the interview? Did they arrive on time? Did they leave time to let you ask questions, etc. So that gives us a very clear indication of what areas we need to improve. So you break it down, even the process itself, right? Was the process too long, or was it manageable for you? Did we did we give you, again, like the right preparation for the actual process and all these things? So it's good to be able to separate them into kind of themes or sections, so then you can definitely like clearly see what area you need to improve on.
I think that's great. And it gives the applicant power again,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
Because
yeah.
we're quick to dish
Of course.
the rejections and the feedback to the candidate and the applicant, right?
Yeah, and if we're realistic about this, odds are you get on average about 20 to 30% of all candidates that interview with you will actually provide you with the survey. They'll actually fill it out. So it's not a lot.
Okay,
Okay.
interesting.
So, and initially you think, okay, it's probably all the negative people that we unfortunately had a poor experience with. It's not the case usually. Um, and more recently, we implemented it this year, and we've had some really positive responses. And I think it does just show that if you put the time and effort into giving someone a good experience, regardless of the outcome, they will see it and they will provide you with feedback. And we've had a really, really positive response rate from our side, but it's about 40 to 50% at the moment. But um, we've had a little bit of negativity, which is good. I think that's the reason we ask for it, and we try and be transparent with you know getting this type of feedback. I think it also does show what type of company you are. If you actually have this implemented, you're looking to improve as a company, you do want to get this feedback. So um again, that's my view on it from an internal person, but I would like to think that's also a positive image from an external point of view.
Yeah, I think if you're not looking to get feedback or if you're not making mistakes, you're not growing.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, but a lot of companies just avoid it too, and they don't say they're not looking for feedback. They just don't do it.
Yeah.
It's like our interviewers and hiring managers, if they know that they're going to be, uh, shall we say, rated on their own performance, of course they're going to be more conscious about how they show up, how prepared they're going to be, you know, um, how they even present themselves, to the candidate. So I think that's a really valid point there as well.
Yeah, and if you're doing a good job, because we also have surveys, well, I've worked in companies before, we have surveys for hiring managers to
Oh,
rate the recruitment process. It's all anonymous. It's not like the recruiter will get called out and they'll have like, one-on-one and the manager's like, oh, you did a bad job. It's more, again, assessing the process. Were we timely? Were we accurate with the search? Did we understand what we're looking for, etc.? Like also our own KPIs. And some of the recruiters in the team are like, shit, I've got to like pull myself together. But if you're a good recruiter or you're a good
yeah,
interviewer or hiring manager, you wouldn't even worry, right? Because you know you're doing your best and showing up on
exactly.
time, etc.
It's kind of like in recruitment, I learned this quite early, is focus on the process, not the end result, right? Because if you consistently improve on, or if you're trying your absolute best on all these other areas, the end result's going to come, right? The amount of hires that you get, it's going to happen if you've got all these other things in place. If you are only focused on trying to hire 20 people this year and you skip processes and, you're just trying to push people through to get numbers, it'll eventually catch up on you. And I think if there's any young recruiters out there, I would always just say, focus on the process. You go through the learning and the training, get better at all these different areas, learn from senior recruiters of how to get better in these areas rather than being worried about making those 20 hires. Because, yeah, ultimately, I think that's focusing on the process is a hell of a lot more enjoyable as well, and rewarding if you get it right.
Yeah. I mean, we do have KPIs at the
Yeah,
companies, but it's also the rest of the KPIs, retention, how many people are staying in, being promoted, how many
yeah,
people are leaving. There's no point in being so fast
yeah,
and then someone leaves in 12 months.
yeah, for sure. And I also, so you know, I enjoy using metrics and data, and I think I don't really measure things based off of how many people we interviewed this week or anything like that. I'm much more focused on the conversion rates. So focused on, you know, what percentage of candidates have actually passed through the process, because that shows me, do our recruiters know what we're looking for? Is the quality at the level that we expect it to be at? And are they aligned with the hiring manager? So let's say we put 60 to 70% of the candidates at recruiter screen to hiring manager screen through, yet only, 20 or 30% of those candidates go through to the team interview stage. There's a massive red flag there for me. It's
Mm.
saying, we are not aligned with the hiring manager. We've put candidates through to you, and you're saying no.
Mm.
More than half of these people are not what we're looking for. On the other side, if you put, the same, say, let's say 60, 70% through, and again, 60, 70% of them go through to the next stage, that tells me that we're aligned. Yeah. And that also tells me that, like, the hiring manager is going to be happy with the quality that's coming through, and that we're, yeah, we are aligned. If we've got interviewers at the very end of the process, and, they say only 10% of the candidates you've put through to us are at the level, then that's an issue between the hiring manager and the team, not us. We have it
Mm.
sorted with the hiring manager, but a conversation needs to happen between the hiring manager and team.
Yeah. Yeah. There's so many issues with that. And the normal solution is to provide everyone with interview training, right?
Mm,
Etiquette, etc., what questions to ask.
yeah, for sure. I think I just put a post up on this last week, how important interview training is for an organization, and how underrated I think it is as well. Um, that if you talk about it from, we can talk about it from an internal perspective first. Okay, so from an internal perspective, the benefits of having interview training is, you have people that know how to sell your company properly, or know how to actually talk about your company to external parties on a recruitment level. You also know how, like, all of these people are going to be a kind of point, not a point of contact. What am I trying to say?
Like, well, they're ambassadors, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
They're
Yeah.
all trying to be ambassadors, right? So you want to make sure that they show up in the right way, and they're prepared, and they're doing the right thing. So, within your interview training, making sure that you go through how to structure an interview, for example, right? Making sure that they leave time at the start to just, like, ease into an interview. Make sure you leave time at the end to provide candidates with an opportunity to ask questions. That's really, really important. And from an internal perspective, hugely valuable, hugely motivating for employees if they're asked, okay, we're going to give you training to learn how to interview. Like, that skill is going to stay with them forever,
Mm.
right? They just will need to probably get a bit of a recap at some point down the road. But, they're skills that people get really excited about and motivated about if they are bought into the company, if they want to grow their team, and, it gives them a huge amount of responsibility, feels like their voice is heard.
Mm.
There's so many knock-on effects to it from an internal perspective. On the external side of it, implementing interview training maintains alignment with all the interviewers, so the same message is being sent to the candidate. The interviews seem very structured in the same way. They're all different, so there's no repetition for the candidate when it comes to focus areas, etc. Uh, they're not being asked inappropriate questions.
Oh, yeah. Like, are you planning to have kids?
Yes. Yeah, all of these, you know, again, major red flags sometimes. Um, and then overall creates a better experience for the candidate, because the interviewers know what's expected of them, right? So it's undervalued completely. I think interview training is seen as something that you just need to do in companies. It's not something that people genuinely, I think, see massive value in, yet they see recruitment as hugely valuable.
Yeah.
So they're not equal there when it's kind of, it should be balanced there completely. So, yeah.
Yeah. So this would be the actual ideal foundation and structure for the entire process. So if I'm watching or listening to this and I'm thinking, okay, Chris has given me loads of nuggets, like you keep saying, loads of nuggets about
Mm.
what companies are doing in the background. I'm understanding the process, the ideal process. If I'm applying for jobs and I'm getting interviews, but companies don't give me a guide on how the interview or company looks, or the hiring managers are not interview trained, how can I better prepare myself to stand out with other interviews?
First is to just ask. Okay. So, um, instinctively, recruiters want you to succeed. We do. Even though you may think we don't,
We do, we really
we
do.
really do. So, we will try and give you as much information as we can. And I think asking for more information about who you're going to be interviewing, what topics you're going to be interviewing about, is there anything else that you need to know about it? That in itself is going to give you a huge amount more information. But looking at the interviewers that you're going to be interviewing, looking at their LinkedIn profiles. Okay. So actually scanning their career path at this point, understanding what different companies they've come from, and any commonalities, shall we say, within there as well, is also really valuable. And then, yeah, I think being able to prepare the right questions. When I say the right questions, prepare questions that you think are relevant to the interviewer that you're going to be asking. I'm talking about if you're, say, well into the interview process, you're way past the recruiter screen, you're kind of coming to the final stages, you've got two interviews with two different team members. One is very technical, the other is much more, let's say one person's on the team outside of your team, but you'll work with them on a regular basis. So, think of questions that are very relevant to those different disciplines, right? In those different areas. And I think if you're able to do those three things, that's great. And that will add a huge amount of value. Also, researching the company properly, like, again, noticing any blogs that they've put out, articles, if they were at any events, mentioning things like that. Uh, that does make you stand out a little bit if you've done your research on that front.
Yeah. I also would like to add, the responsibilities section, like what we want candidates to do and
Yeah.
like expertise, experience. Take that into account as well. So reread the amount of interviews I've had saying, "Oh, I've applied for so many jobs. I'm trying to remember which one this is." Really, very, very often. And I still like them. They're qualified, etc. They don't necessarily get knocked out based off of that feedback. But just rejig your memory of what, because we also look at the responsibilities, and this is like stuff we've pre-discussed in the
Yeah.
kickoff meeting. So try and think of examples, stories, achievements around the
Yeah, for sure.
responsibilities
Yeah,
section.
really, like I would say prepare probably three or four juicy examples
Mm,
that actually would probably integrate a lot of the things that we potentially ask. Like ultimately, there's a knock-on effect with all these responsibilities that if you are able to give a very juicy response example of a project that you worked on that also involved working with cross-functional teams, that involved strict deadlines, priorities, working with external parties. All of these things are probably within that job description in different bullet points, and you're able to combine them all in one, right? So I think having those types of examples, how to potentially give feedback to somebody or going through a challenging situation or something like that, like that also combines everything. And I think for candidates having a very structured answer, okay, we talk about the STAR methodology that is a little outdated, but at the same time,
Yeah.
it is very good to have as a framework for situational based questions.
Yeah.
Okay, so tell me about a time when you did this, or can you give me an example of when you did this? The only, like, people probably hate these days the STAR methodology because it's
I can
very
never remember
outdated,
it. Can you
right?
imagine you're doing an interview and you're blanking and you just think star?
Yeah,
I
yeah,
wouldn't even know what to
yeah,
do.
yeah. It's, I think the whole reason for it is to try and outline the bigger picture and then become narrow and narrow and narrow, right?
Mm.
So you want to outline the whole situation and then get really kind of down to the crux of it, and really identify what you were responsible for and the end result. And
Yeah.
it's a structured approach to an answer. That's the core of why that is such a long-standing framework
Mm.
that we still enjoy getting an answer like that from a recruiter's perspective.
Yeah, the star, car, they all have like they all rhyme. I like just plain and simple storytelling.
Yeah,
So just think of like a book, and then of course a very tiny book about one project you've done or something you've achieved.
yeah.
And then hook us in like, oh, I did this. And we're like, we're listening.
Mm-hmm.
How did you do that? Tell us how you did it. And the end. What did you achieve? What
Exactly.
was the outcome?
Yeah. And yeah, I think for interviewers and even for recruiters, I think the best way to actually get the best answer from a candidate is using these probing questions, which I think are completely underrated and undervalued because, first of all, I don't know if, again, interview training is so important because we talk about these things. We talk about how to use probing questions and what type of example can you provide actually using them. And I know in the past I've had a lot of interviewers that just don't use them, and they say, right, the candidate doesn't have the skill.
Mm.
I'm like, have you actually pushed them? Did you actually go into more detail about this? And they're like, no, because they didn't tell me. But actually, that's really disheartening because we've had an opportunity to question the candidate on these things, and we haven't gone into enough detail with the question, which means there's doubt now.
Mm.
There's doubt from the hiring manager whether the person actually has a skill because this person doesn't think they do, but actually we didn't push them enough.
Mm.
And I think probing questions are just really, really undervalued.
And it's so easy. You don't have to be, direct. You don't have to be like an extroverted person. Because even hiring managers, for example, sometimes aren't the most outgoing, right? They could
No,
be really
yeah,
analytical. So just saying why, that's a good probing question.
it is.
Someone explain something and say why.
Yeah,
Why
yeah,
did you
yeah.
do that? Yeah.
Exactly. And you just use that question again and again and again.
Like an annoying child. Why?
Yeah,
Why?
yeah.
Why?
You can use why in different ways. Tell me a little bit more about that, or
Yeah.
can you go into more detail about that one? Yeah, I'm just curious about that. Right? There's a lot of different ways to use it in order to get to should we say, the bottom of the core of what they're actually talking about. But yeah, I thought that was they're also, yeah, just really valuable.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. So I'm getting interviews, etc. Of course, I'm not getting all of the job offers, right? I'm not proceeding with all of them. I
Hmm.
will get rejections. How do you think, as an applicant, I should handle rejections?
So as an applicant, right now it's happening everywhere, of course, and I think it can be very difficult to get a rejection that you've gone through multiple processes, and it's very difficult to just register and accept that you didn't get the job. Uh, I did a poll on this a few weeks ago on LinkedIn where I asked my network, if you didn't get a job, how would you like to receive feedback? And I said either through email or through a call. And I think I was quite surprised by the answers. So the email won by 64%.
Email.
email.
Really?
Yeah, I had 180 people voting on it, and I was super surprised by that.
I am.
Yeah,
What?
yeah.
More than half one email.
More than half on email, yeah. Now, the majority of the answers were an email with an option of a call.
Ah, so they get the power, they get the decision.
Yes.
Right.
And I think because I've been in recruitment for so long at this point, my instinct is like, be personable, give them a call, let them know. But I have definitely called people where I've let them know, hey, I'm really sorry we didn't move forward for this and this reason. And it was very clear they just didn't register the reason
Mm.
for it.
Or they
They
like
just wanted to
outlash.
get off the
Yeah.
phone with me. And it was only honestly since I did that poll that I've realized that maybe I need to change my approach on this, because giving candidates the actual freedom to either accept and get more feedback or not, it is really on their plate. If we're just telling them, yeah, this is the reason, but they haven't been able to accept it first, then then they're never going to actually learn from what happened there. So going back to your question, take time to register the actual the result. If you got rejected, take time to take a day or two, because it could be a job that you're really really excited about, and that is disheartening. And you need to be able to take a step back and be in a position to accept feedback. So once you've kind of gone through, it's almost like those stages that you go through, acceptance.
It's like grief.
Yeah, a
Yeah.
little bit, right?
Yeah.
It's very minimal grief, shall we
Yeah.
say. You need to be able to be in the position of acceptance to actually take on feedback and learn from it. So I would say, once you're in that position, always ask for feedback. And yes, you're going to be frustrated because some people won't give it to you, but the ones that do, it's going to be hugely valuable for you. You're going to be able to improve the next interview that you do, and consistently you're going to get better at this. Ultimately, interviewing is a skill in itself. So
Yeah.
you need to be able to learn throughout that process. You cannot expect to have one interview and get the job immediately. It doesn't work like that. And so I would say that if candidates are going through this phase of, unfortunately, consistent rejection at the moment, there's obviously aspects that you need to improve on your interviewing skills, and reaching out uh, to the recruiter there, understanding, what you need to improve on there. If you have any recruiter friends, also reach out to them and ask them
Yeah.
if they have any advice at the moment, if you could do a mock interview with them and actually potentially see what they get or see what their feedback is. Because again, we interview people every day, and I think it's important for we kind of understand the skills needed to be a good interviewer. And it's very different than getting the job. Like, actually doing the job is very different to getting the job. So if you're not used to it, try your best to either build your network on LinkedIn as well. Okay, so whether it be with recruiters or people in your field that are potentially more senior or in positions that you'd like to be in, and ask them, how did they get there? What type of things do I need to be talking about in my interviews? Again, most people want to help other people, so they will, if they have the time, if they have the availability to do so, they will give you 15 minutes.
Yeah.
Be prepared, ask questions, and try and take it on board. But again, I'm saying this in being in a privileged position of having worked in this industry for a very long time. If you're not used to interviewing and you've never done it before, yeah, it is very difficult. That's the end game. And I think trying to use your own network and use the resources that you currently have to
Mm.
improve is really important.
Yeah, and I think just maybe it's me, or maybe I'm speaking on behalf of other people recruiting or hiring, but even if I do like 8 interviews in one day, it's not like I'm going to the interviews with the same energy, etc. Like it drains you. So I also have
Absolutely.
to show up and be enthusiastic. And then I don't know who I'm meeting on the other
Yeah,
side. It's never the same candidate, right? So I'm also meeting a stranger for the first time and trying to break the ice and yeah, getting comfortable with it. So even though we do it more, it yeah, it's also sometimes unnerving for us meeting new
completely.
people. Yeah.
But, doing 8 different interviews in a day is incredibly draining, but you feed off of the candidate's energy, even through a screen. It's it's easy to see when somebody's super excited about a job that
Mm.
you're interviewing them for, and that gives you energy as a recruiter. It really does. And I think coming across as someone not intentionally disinterested or very nervous can be, quite
We
difficult.
understand.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it can be quite difficult. So, um, try your best to just, prepare for those interviews, and then try and be confident in what you're going to be saying and how you actually speak, and um, all of those things come across. And I think that's probably what I would leave uh, leave the advice with for
Yeah.
candidates at this point.
I mean, you've given us so many insights on what goes on behind the scenes, and people can now understand, expect it, and navigate and prepare
Yeah,
around everything.
yeah,
So this has been incredibly valuable. If I'm watching or listening to this, I want to know I want to know more about these polls. I want to like, participate in these polls. I
yeah,
want
yeah,
to
yeah.
interact with you. How do I get in touch with you or
Yeah, yeah,
see what
yeah.
you're doing?
Definitely LinkedIn. So just Chris Redmond. Um, I'm connected with yourself and a lot of other recruiters in Amsterdam here, and I think really across Europe. So yeah, reach out. I'm very happy to even provide a little bit more advice. I'm active enough on LinkedIn. I wouldn't say I'm very, very active, but I'd be leaving 1 or 2 posts a week to try and focus on how to give candidates advice on what they can do moving forward, but also on the internal side, trying to help potentially, founders of smaller companies to how to implement new processes, or what recruitment things they should be looking to focus on at that point as well. So yeah.
Yeah, I follow you. I love taking part in your polls. I love like just commenting and reaching out to you. You are, even though you're not super active, you are very responsive.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think it's one of the core things is just put content out there that's valuable for people. So yeah, that's what I try my best to
No,
do.
you do a really good job. You do a really good job.
Thank you so much.
Chris, this has been really enlightening. Also for me, I'll take a lot of this information, send it internally in my company. But no, recruiters, HR, and also people applying for jobs
Yeah.
got a lot of value from this episode. So thank you so much for coming all this way.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a lovely conversation, and yeah, hopefully see you soon.